Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us today because we're looking at a story that is, honestly, almost too wild to believe. We're diving into one of the most unbelievable true stories of human endurance and psychology in modern history. We're talking about Hiroo Onoda, a man who literally fought a phantom war for decades after the rest of the world just moved on. It's a story that completely challenges how we think about reality, duty, and just the incredible power of the human mind. Let's get right into our opening contrast because this is where the sheer scale of the situation is going to hit you.
Okay, let's dive into this. Just picture the year 1974 for a second. The world has completely changed. World War II? It's been over for nearly 30 years. We're talking an era of peace, skyscrapers going up, new cities booming. The world has collectively healed. But at the exact same time, hidden deep inside the suffocating, sweltering jungles of Lubang Island in the Philippines, there's a man completely frozen in time. Hiroo Onoda, an intelligence officer for the Japanese Imperial Army, is still fighting. His uniform is basically rags stitched together over the decades, and yet his military rifle and traditional sword, they are impeccably maintained, gleaming. He is actively fighting a war that evaporated 29 years ago. So, how does a human mind do that? How do you isolate yourself from reality for nearly 3 decades without a single shred of backup?
Well, to understand his reality, we have to rewind to Section 1, Conditioned for the Emperor. Let's look at the making of this soldier.
So, Onoda was born in 1922 in a small Japanese village. But you gotta remember, this was a very, very different Japan than the high-tech, modern nation we know today. This was an era of total militarization. Literally from the moment a child took their first steps, they were wrapped up in this culture of absolute discipline and unwavering loyalty to the emperor. In that kind of environment, the whole concept of surrendering didn't even exist in their vocabulary. It wasn't just discouraged, children were taught that giving up to an enemy was a fate far, far worse and much more shameful than death itself. That was the atmospheric pressure Onoda grew up in. Extreme loyalty wasn't just expected of you, it was the absolute baseline of your existence.
So the crucial point here is this one: precise command he was given. By 1944, Onoda had been handpicked for elite training at the Nako Military School, which was all about intelligence and guerrilla warfare. When he finished, his commanding officer looked him squarely in the eye and delivered an order that basically chained Onoda to the jungle for the rest of his youth. The officer said, "You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. Whatever happens, we'll come back for you." He was told it might take 3 years, it might take 5, but they would return. That single, incredibly powerful command became Onoda's absolute reality. It was the psychological anchor holding him down through decades of unimaginable isolation.
Let's move on and see how this all builds into Section 2, the war that never ended, where we focus on his actual mission on Lubang Island. In late 1944, right as the war is hitting its brutal climax, Onoda is deployed to Lubang Island in the Philippines. This spot was critical for enemy supply lines, and his mission was crystal clear: disrupt and destroy. Now, because of his elite intelligence training, he wasn't sent there to fight huge, sweeping infantry battles. No, he was there to be a ghost. He was trained to infiltrate, survive off the land, and just turn that jungle into a living nightmare for his enemies. Sabotage, gather intel, and stay totally hidden. And as we'll see, he was frighteningly good at it. But then, history takes a massive turn. August 1945. The United States drops atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan officially surrenders, and the horrors of World War II suddenly end. The whole world exhales. Now, to tell all the remaining guerrilla fighters scattered out in the Pacific, Allied forces and the Japanese government start dropping literally thousands of leaflets from airplanes directly over the jungles. The leaflets clearly say, "The war is over. Japan has surrendered. Come down from the mountains." But Onoda? He looks at the leaflet, applies all that intense counter-espionage training he got at Nakano, and immediately deduces it's a trap, a highly sophisticated enemy trick. Because in his mind, an empire doesn't just surrender, right? That's what his conditioning told him.
And that perfectly leads us into Section 3, decades of solitary survival. Let's look at his day-to-day life, hiding out there.
I mean, just imagine the sheer physical and mental toll of this routine. For nearly 30 years, Onoda didn't have a roof over his head. No supply drops, no real rations. To stay alive, he and his fellow holdouts basically had to become one with the jungle. Step 1 was foraging for whatever they could find, mostly raw bananas and coconuts. Step 2, risking their lives to sneak onto local farms and steal rice under the cover of darkness. And Step 3 When the hunger got totally unbearable, they'd hunt down stray cows, carefully slaughter them, and dry the meat in the sun so it could last for months. It was just this grueling, relentless cycle of survival, executed flawlessly day after day, fueled entirely by his intense sense of military duty.
And this brilliantly illustrates the absolute fortress of his cognitive dissonance. Over the decades, people didn't just forget about him. The Philippine and Japanese governments tried absolutely everything. They dropped current newspapers over the trees. They dropped handwritten letters and recent photos from Onoda's own family. They even flew planes over the island with these massive loudspeakers, playing recordings of his own brother begging him to come home. But, to an elite intelligence officer trained to suspect deception everywhere, this was just proof of how far the enemy would go to trick him. He processed every single piece of evidence as part of this brilliant, elaborate conspiracy to capture him.
Now, early on, Onoda wasn't totally alone. He actually had 3 comrades with him. But take a look at this timeline, and you can really feel the devastating weight of the years going by. 1945, the isolation begins. After 4 brutal years, in 1949, Private Akatsu just couldn't take it anymore. He slipped away to surrender. 5 years later, in 1954, Corporal Shimada was tragically killed in a shootout with a search party. After that, for 18 long years, it was just Onoda and Private Kozuka. That is, until 1972, when Kozuka was killed during a clash with local police. From that exact moment on, for the very first time, Hiroo Onoda was completely, utterly alone in the dark.
We also absolutely have to look neutrally at the very real, very tragic consequences of Onoda's ongoing mission. He wasn't just peacefully camping in the woods. To Onoda, anyone in that jungle was either an enemy combatant or an enemy sympathizer. Over those 29 years, it's estimated that 30 local Filipino islanders lost their lives, and over 100 were injured in clashes, ambushes, and in crossfire with Onoda and his men. It's a stark, heartbreaking reminder of the real-world human cost of this localized, private war fueled by blind obedience.
So, how does this all finally end? Let's jump to Section 4, The Adventurer and the Order.
Enter Norio Suzuki. This is the part of the story where things get almost completely surreal. Suzuki was this 24-year-old eccentric Japanese adventurer, a college dropout who just decided to travel the world. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't some master tracker, he just had this very specific, honestly kind of funny bucket list. His top 3 life goals were, number 1, see a wild panda. Number 2, see the mythical Yeti. And number 3, find the legendary ghost soldier Hiroo Onoda. Armed with pretty much nothing but a tent, a few supplies, and a ton of audacity, this young civilian marches right into the jungle. And incredibly, what entire military search operations couldn't pull off in decades, Suzuki somehow achieves in just 4 days.
Yep, on February 20, 1974, they actually crossed paths. It was a super tense standoff at first. Onoda literally had his rifle raised ready to fire, but Suzuki boldly yells out Onoda's name in Japanese. He tells him the emperor and the people of Japan are worried about him and that the war is finally over. And amazingly, they sit down and talk. Onoda actually listens. But, and here is the kicker, the psychological hold was still so profound that Onoda straight up refused to drop his weapon or abandon his post without a direct, official order from his original commanding officer. That 29-year-old verbal contract was still holding him hostage.
Now what's really interesting about this is the incredible visual contrast and the wild passage of time. Suzuki heads back to Japan with photos proving Onoda is actually alive. The Japanese government scrambles and finally tracks down Onoda's original commander, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. Now, back in 1944, Taniguchi was this fierce, authoritative military leader barking out deadly guerrilla orders. But in 1974, the military had been dismantled ages ago. Major Taniguchi was now just a quiet, elderly man making a living selling books. So the government pulls this former commander right out of his civilian life, flies him out to the Philippines, and sends him deep into the jungle to break the spell he cast 3 decades earlier.
And the emotional climax of the whole story happens right here. Deep in a jungle clearing, Major Taniguchi, wearing this makeshift military uniform, stands in front of a rigid, perfectly saluting Hiroo Onoda. Taniguchi pulls out a piece of paper, and he reads the official imperial command. He declares that Japan has lost the war, all combat operations are ceased, and Onoda's mission is officially over. Hearing those exact words, from the exact man who gave him his orders 29 years ago, the invisible chains finally snapped. Onoda wept. He carefully handed over his impeccably kept rifle, his remaining ammunition, and his ceremonial sword. The war was actually over.
But stepping out of that jungle was really only half the battle. Let's move into our final part, Section 5, A Hero Out of Time, and look at his return to the modern world. Onoda returned to Japan at the age of 52. Think about that. He walked into the jungle as a 22-year-old kid and emerged as an aging man. He was instantly hailed as this massive national hero, a living symbol of traditional Japanese values, loyalty, and unmatched resilience. But there was a heavy tragedy to it all. His entire youth had been swallowed up by the jungle, and worse, the nation he sacrificed absolutely everything to protect. It just didn't exist anymore. He found 1970s Japan to be overwhelmingly modernized, heavily westernized, and obsessed with consumerism. The technological shock and the cultural disconnect were so intense that he simply couldn't adjust. Just a year later, looking for a simpler life, he left his homeland and moved to Brazil to raise cattle.
Yet the island of Lubang never fully left him. In 1996, decades after he finally surrendered, Onoda actually returned to the Philippine island where he'd fought his ghost war. He didn't go back as a soldier, though. He went back as an old man looking for some form of closure. While there, he donated $10,000 to the local community to start up a scholarship fund for children. It was a really profound gesture, a quiet, heartfelt attempt to make amends and ease the lingering pain of the families in the community he had unknowingly terrorized for decades, all in the name of duty.
Hiroo Onoda passed away in Tokyo in 2014 at the remarkable age of 91. He lived a life of absolute, uncompromising conviction. He survived 29 impossible years in the harshest conditions you can imagine. And in his own mind, he never yielded. He technically won his private war by refusing to surrender until he was ordered to. But when we look back at the entirety of his life, it leaves us with this really haunting final question to consider. He conquered the jungle, and he conquered his enemies. But in giving up 30 years of his life for an empire that had already fallen, did he ultimately lose to time? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll catch you next time.